Good afternoon, everybody. You're listening to 914 Wired, a video podcast, which you can listen to in a whole variety of different places. A lot of people seem to be listening on YouTube. If you're doing that, make sure to click the subscribe button so you find out about future episodes. My partner this afternoon is Peter Moses. Peter, how you doing?
I'm okay. I'm a little rattled by things that are going on around the country, including around here. But
there's a lot to be rattled about. 914 Wired is where we talk about politics, education, and culture, and things that are happening, starting in area code 914. But these kinds of issues radiate all over the region and the country. We've got a couple of guests today that can kind of focus us a little bit. Susan Guma and Lee Kinnally are from the Westchester County Fair Campaign Practices Committee. So fair campaign practices, it almost in this day and age sounds like an oxymoron. Susan, tell us a little bit about what your organization does and how you keep these local campaigns fair.
Well, I think to go back into some of the background, we were established back in the early 90s, really through the urging of local journalists, political journalists, who felt there was a real need to establish a committee like this for Westchester. And they went to the League of Women Voters and sought their assistance, and the League created this committee. It is not attached to the League, it's independent of the League, but the League created the concept of it.
Mm-hmm. And the League itself, of course, has a tremendous reputation for fairness and independence and objectivity, so that makes sense. So how does your group operate?
So we operate, we have 14 members that represent the different geographical areas of Westchester. We have a website. We have a set of principles about how to conduct fair campaigns, and we entertain complaints from individuals, local officials who are running for office in a variety of offices across Westchester.
Let me ask you a question. These 14 members, do they run the political spectrum?
It is all inclusive, and we are actually in the process this spring of activating our nominating committee, and we certainly want and encourage people who are interested to apply for membership on it. But we do have both, conservatives and Democrats as members.
So I would add to that, voters tend to cut a little older, especially in Westchester County. What are you doing to attract younger members to your group? Because that's like an important voting block.
It is important, and I think that is a very good question for us, because that is one of the areas in diversifying the committee that we're very interested in doing. We certainly do have some younger members than Lee and myself, but we know that needs to be equalized in a much firmer way. So we're hoping this spring, when we get together, we'll be able to begin opening that process, and through visibility such as this, people will be interested in reaching out to us, and then we'll go through a nominating process for it.
Now, for people to, when you step in, you only step in when somebody contacts you with an issue, yes. Or do you ever initiate things on your own from things that you read, or it has to be brought about by somebody contacting you?
It has to be initiated by a person that's running for office.
Can you give us a couple of examples? Yeah, can you give us a couple of examples?
A political committee. Pardon me, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You've been at this a while. Can you give us a couple of examples where a candidate or a group came to you and said, hey, there's this thing going on, we need you to look into it?
Yes. I mean, we can give you examples of the kinds of complaints that we get, and they're usually driven by print media at this point. as they have been forever. Now, social media is certainly creeping into this, but it's primarily by print media. And there are complaints about misuse of information that is on a flyer or a newsletter or some kind of advertising vehicle. There is a complaint about misrepresentation. And I would say that most of those complaints that come to us, once we have a hearing, we can sort of parse exactly why people feel the way they do about it. And, you know, there are key words that are real triggers for doing this. And we look for those. It's really to be really aware of how the average voter reads and perceives the material that they're reading. And to be as clear as possible in that, in their print media particularly, that what they are saying is not, it does not use misleading words.
Yeah, Lee, let me ask you a question, Lee. If when you receive a complaint, you reach out to the person who the complaint was made about, correct?
A copy of the complaint is given to that individual or campaign. That's right. And
take us through the chronology of what happens after you do that.
Well, after we do it, we circulate it among all of our members, including the members of the political parties who are part of our operation, part of our review, and the complainant has filed everything. We have circulated it, and there's an opportunity to the candidate or the campaign to respond, and then the committee decides whether there should be a hearing. If there is a hearing, then either in person, we haven't had many of those recently, or remotely, we have a hearing in which the members of the campaign are there, the complainant, the respondent, the members of the representatives from political parties are there, and everyone is afforded an opportunity to present their case, to rebut it, to ask questions, to sum up, and then we have a deliberative process where we make a determination.
And what happens after you make a determination?
Well, when we make the determination, it's in writing. It is circulated among everybody, especially to the media, because the media is quite important here. They help us disseminate the findings, and it's an opportunity, I think, for everybody to come together and say, okay, here's an issue, we're resolving it, and we hope it will be the end of it. Unfortunately, a fair campaign practice a complaint can arise out of a determination. If somebody does not use the findings in the proper fashion, that in of itself can be an unfair campaign practice. Our requirement is that if you are going to quote, you must quote the finding in toto. You can't just pick and choose what you want to use, because it may skew the facts. So if you're going to use the finding, you have to in haec verba put it in there verbatim. So there's no issue as to whether or not that in and of itself is skewed.
We live in very stratified times. Charlie, I'm just going to ask one more question, then I'm going to give up the floor. We live in very stratified times. We have members of Congress who are issued congressional subpoenas who don't respond to them and basically refuse to be part of the process. If someone is made a complaint against, are they required by some law to respond to you? Do they and if there are repercussions? I've never seen them.
So to answer that question, they're not required to do it. But we have not had, in my history with it, we've not had a person from the other party not representing themselves. Okay. And I think a lot of this goes, quite frankly, to the leadership of the political parties. And they are, as Lee indicated, they each have representatives that are part of our process. They do not vote and make decisions on the findings, but they're there for advice, and they work along with the committee itself. So we have found very strong support from the political community on this.
Yeah, I got a follow-up question for Peter, which is, you were a writer for many, many years. What do you think of that requirement that you quote the finding in toto?
It's unenforceable.
How could you possibly enforce
it's
that?
Unenforceable. It's and the findings, if they find against you, while I'm sure from what they're saying, the party, not the aggrieved party, but the person who perpetrated the mistake or the misstatement, is under no legal obligation to do a thing. And
that's right. We have no legal authority. That's true.
Yeah.
And for that reason, so you're asking me a question. If and Ardina, you've covered at least as many political campaigns as I have, most of them in New York City. Can you see this ever having any resonance in the blustery, bare-knuckled world of New York politics? And now it's come up to the suburbs too, by the way. But anyway, Ardina.
Yeah, no, not your point is well made, Peter. I mean, it happens all the time, unfortunately, in political campaigns where things are stated that just simply aren't fact. And the way anchors, reporters will cover it, they'll just say, well, so-and-so and so-and-so said this about Joe Schmo, but there was nothing to substantiate it. And unfortunately, it's just glossed over in the matter of a 2-second commentary. Right. So to publish it in its entirety, it can't be done.
We're
Susan,
really
you
talking
mentioned
about the campaign using it. Not a journalist can pick.
No, we understand.
No. What they're talking about, Lee, is documenting the findings of fair campaign. I'm not making light of the fair campaign efforts, because what you do is very noble work and it has to be done.
Laudable.
But laudable. I mean, but the media is guilty, if you will, of not publishing all of your findings in total. So the public gets a smattering of what you're saying. But at least the important thing is that you're getting the word out there that what's being said in campaign A simply is not true. And that's really.
And within the findings, we usually list why we found in a certain way.
Exactly.
Because we feel it's educational as much as anything else, so people understand if we made a finding of unfair, what it was based on.
Now, I have a question. What about you? We now have a new component of campaigns and of the world, and we've done shows on it. AI. You've got artificial intelligence. Has that ratcheted up your efforts in campaign false assertions?
Yeah, social media has. AI has not yet, but it is looming. Let's put it that way. And we are trying to find out where we go with this, what kind of guidance. First of all, detection of AI is difficult.
Right.
If you have a campaign piece, a press release, or a palm card that has words that you can tell that this is false or not false or whatever, it's easy to do. AI is much different. If it's audio, is it video, it's easier to determine. If you take a look at certain, it's not. There are ways of looking at AI and comparing it. If there's a falsity, if there's a narration that's wrong, if there's a Photoshop, things of that nature. We haven't had that yet. We're waiting for it. I think we're looking into it. But it's all part and parcel of the political process now, and everybody has to be sensitive to it and how it could be misused and abused.
So, Susan, you mentioned that this committee was formed in the 90s, an offshoot of League of Women Voters. Have you been involved with it that whole time?
Ever since the mid 90s, yes. Yes.
And so, if you could kind of look back over those now decades, where are local politicians getting themselves into trouble? What are the friction points? Where there must be some recurring themes. What are they?
Well, I think one of the returning themes is that the younger candidates, by that young I mean not necessarily in age, but have not run before. Mm-hmm. That seems to be the most vulnerable part, because they are unaware of our committee and the process, and that's one of our real tasks, is trying to get that message out to the parties for the people that are running for the first time, so that they have the principles in front of them and they know what. Go ahead.
What mistakes do they make? What mistakes do they make?
Well, they make mistakes. They make mistakes by making a statement such as, so and so is responsible for a budget being passed that had a result, making it, indicating that this one person was totally responsible for that vote, which of course is most of the time is not true at all. It's done by a council or a commission. It's by several people, but it's placing the owner, the politician, in the position of having the total leadership and making a decision that particular area of the community did not want. And it could be
okay.
And so you go then it could also, they could reflect on, they could be using data in the wrong way by looping budget numbers together, which once you see the budget, they've combined things that make it much larger than it really is.
Okay, so in other words, they're parsing information in a lengthy budget document, but maybe making a statement that there's a kernel of truth, but it is maybe not an accurate representation of what's really going on. These
or they
like
could use in the language
in
the language they could say someone was laundering money. I mean, a lot of it is in the language that's used and what an average voter would think of that.
How much of it is, I know this sounds like an esoteric question, but how much of misinformation is just part of the smear campaign tactics, and how much of it is just kind of innocent errors in the accumulation of data or misinterpreting data?
Some of it, some of it, if I can, has to do with, as Susan was talking about, people who haven't run before. They are somewhat naive. They're really not totally focused on what the words mean. And that's why it's important to get the political parties involved, to do a little education before these candidates run. You find a lot of this happening when people are primarying. Right. It's not always Republicans against Democrats. It can be Republicans against Republicans and Democrats against Democrats, where you have a primary and somebody is trying to break in, has never run before, and doesn't understand what the pitfalls are. Something as innocent as having a campaign piece with other politicians who have not endorsed this particular person, but it looks like on the campaign piece that these people have endorsed them. They're standing next to them, things of that nature. Or sometimes it happens even with people who've been in office. They will say re-elect. Okay, well, if they haven't been elected or re-elect, we had this a while ago. reelect this person. Okay, well, that person isn't in office right now. They may have held the office 6 or 8 years ago,
Mm.
but you can't say, reelect me for senator if I haven't been a senator before, or I've been redistricted or something like that. Uh, you can't say that my opponent raised your taxes. Well, as Susan said, it was the board of trustees or the city council or whatever that did it. Um, Things of that nature. And they are repetitive, and you see it more in lawn signs, in billboards, things of that
Mm.
nature.
Which is more egregious? Is it are they statements, or I should say, misstatements made by candidates, or photos, images themselves? Because a lot of times people say, they had a photo of Jamal Bowman was a case in point, where apparently he was misrepresented as a photo which people claim to have been colorized to make him look more menacing. I don't know. But, here again, is there equal weight placed on photos as well as so-called documentation, also written word?
I think so. It's all context, as Susan said. It's how it's presented, and not only just the photo, but maybe some text in connection with the photo. Okay, so
Can you give us an
and
example of a race that you helped change the direction of how it was running?
Susan,
I can say
I don't.
that I can say just even in the last year or two, we have found unfair with statements that have been used, and the person that the committee found unfair to really changed the script of what they said.
And you
Or
can't
they
tell
had
us
it
who
on
that is?
Or they had it, no, they had it on their website, and they took it off. And
Yeah.
I think if there's material that has already gone out and you can't recall it, that is another issue. But often the opposing party that the committee found for in that complaint will publish the fact that we found an unfair complaint against their competitor, and they'll publish it in full, and then send it out to the people that the list that they have.
Yeah.
Or the
So
press
what
will
this
pick it up.
And what this comes back to, I think, is that the threat of the finding from a watchdog group like your organization, that itself could be a deterrent to a candidate, playing games with the truth. And so you follow, I think that maybe it's the threat of the use that's as damaging as the actual finding itself, because there's a blizzard of activity in the course of a campaign. I've worked on campaigns. I've been a district leader. I ran for school board a couple of times, and in the course of those campaigns, you're constantly every day creating materials. You're writing things. There's a lot of narrative that goes into the course of a campaign, and mistakes can happen. And choices absolutely happen. And I think that what you're describing is that the presence of a fair campaign practices committee and the potential for a negative finding and the results of the negative finding, I think that's the idea, is to keep them honest. I don't know how well it works, because I get the same literature as everybody else, and a lot of it is filled with baloney.
Well, I think that goes back to the onus that's on all of us, which is fact checking. It's really reading deeper than the mailer that comes to us. I mean, that's an easy thing to say, but I think ultimately it's on all of us as citizens to really know the candidates and what they stand for.
So if I'm running for office and I say my opponent, who's the incumbent, raised taxes, that's a violation of campaign fair practices?
Yes, it is. If they said they voted to raise taxes, that's one thing. If they said they're responsible for the taxes being raised, I mean, I think it's the language. It's the way the language is used.
Understood. Well, listen, that's what we're trying to do sometimes on this show. We've interviewed a bunch of politicians. I guess by asking questions, you're keeping them honest. And so Susan Guma and Lee Kinnally, thanks for coming on 914 Wired and telling us a little bit about what Westchester County Fair Campaign Practices Committee does and how you're keeping them honest on the local races and the local elections in Westchester. Thank you for being our guests.
Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity. We really appreciate it.